Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
Hey, hello.
Hello.
How's it going?
Good.
I can't see you. Is
wait.
your camera not on yet?
Okay, you are correct. It is not. There you
Hey,
go.
A man with a shirt.
In the
probably-
duck world.
That's amazing.
That is a nice shirt. I like your shirt. That's awesome.
I didn't even get to tell you though. I think you win still. You know, your shirt's amazing. It's pretty great. It's all about patterns.
Yeah, that's true. This has got like weird little skulls and tentacles in it and stuff like that. And it's I went to the same manufacturer to say, oh, I like that. Let me see what other designs they have. Nothing else like it at all. Just like totally nothing. It's like they let one designer go crazy, and it's like I should have bought several.
Man,
I'm just going to wear this out.
I did the same thing. It's funny, I just learned so much more about you from you telling me that than I could have ever asked you in an interview.
Well,
question.
There you go. We're done here.
Well, hold on, because no one else knows anything yet. So hold on.
Okay.
Let's just say, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, this is Tad Stones, creator, the Buzz Lightyear TV show. I'm trying to think of all the things that we all grew up, all the things we grew up watching.
I mean, I co-directed a lot of stuff. I mean, I always had the joy of my career in general was working with crews of talented people. My goal was to hire people more talented than I was in each individual category. So I had great directors, writers, artists, and, especially my early shows, everything went through me. But, I had less to do because of the talents of the people working for me. So that was the fun part.
Man, so, okay. There you go. So a humble man, but basically you're a Disney prodigy, and you knew people like I guess like Eric Larson from the Nine Old Men and things like that.
Eric was in charge of the training program that was basically just Eric. You'd come in, you'd bring in a portfolio. If they liked it, you're brought in, and then you kind of had to learn animation and do a test at the same time. Although a lot of us loved animation, had the same kind of how to animate books, so we weren't starting from ground zero. But yeah, Eric, I came in about 6 months after Ron Clemens, Ron who did, Little Mermaid and Moana and everything in between with John Musker, and then 3 months before Glenn Keane, master animator, powerful animator. And then, I did. So I then moved I worked my way up to assistant animator in Rescuers, the original. I had one animated scene. And then I moved into story on Fox and Hound, although I didn't get credit. And then they weren't sure what to do with me, I think. I did a educational film that was produced in New Zealand by a former Disney animator who had worked with one of the other Nine Old Men, John Lounsbury. And that little piece of edutainment got me on the radar scope of management, who said, we're going to move you over to WED, now known as Imagineering, to work on Epcot. So I worked over there in Epcot Center. I worked on the transportation pavilion, and the coolest thing about that, I spent 9 months in like an 8x12 room with Ward Kimball, one of the greats of the Nine Old Men, and he was a crack up. I wish I'd kept a diary back then.
Okay, wait, before we because this is all stuff we got to go deeper, but I want to understand what got you into the door. How did you get into Disney, and what were you doing? You were like in Burbank. Like, what was your youth that led you to this?
I was literally born across the street from the Walt Disney Studios, St. Joe's Hospital. I mean, literally from there. My dad worked for Carnation Company, which, had a deal with Disneyland because they had the Carnation cafes and restaurants and whatever. So once a year they had the company picnic at Disneyland. So I got to go to Disneyland once a year from, probably not the opening year, but whatever, from the early 50s. And I just loved animation. The Disneyland show was on TV, and I loved the episodes where they went behind the scenes, both of designing the park and how animation works. And if you went to the park, there was an art of animation exhibit. Bought the Bob Thomas book, which was reprinted, and then Don Hahn did his version of the same book twice, that showed all the steps of producing an animated feature illustrated by different features depending on what they were promoting. And I loved all that stuff, and I just love cartoons. Now, and I grew when I was like 5 years old, 6 years old in LA. We had, this is back in the days before, or just about the same time as animation was first done for TV. Instead, most of what I saw were old cartoons that were sold to television stations to play over and over and over again. And some of those, I didn't realize till later, were silent cartoons that they then put soundtracks to. So I saw things like Coco the Clown out of the Inkpot series, that if you do any research, you'll see how that is, old black and white films, and Betty Boop and Popeye, the Fleischer stuff. Fleischer Superman episodes is fantastic. So, and of course, all the Warner Brothers cartoons back from the early days. And then of course, all the classic Bugs and Daffy and Porky and all of that. So that was a great background for me. And then I literally got in the door at Disney because the suite mate of my girlfriend in college, her father was ex Atencio. X was actually a layout guy, and then went on to design rides at Imagineering, but he actually worked on many Ward Kimball projects. Anyway, she knew about this training program. She said, boy, with your artwork, you should try the Disney training program. And I had written off animation as a career because the only place I felt worth working at was Disney, because they were the only ones doing full animation at the time. Everything else was for TV. And it's like, but I love that stuff. And I thought Disney had their guys. They're the guys who started the studio with Walt. So, you know, and turned out that's exactly what was happening. They'd still had their guys. They weren't looking for more people until about the time I was in college. You know, they put out some cartoons that made more money than they expected. Robin Hood, nothing like the amount they made these days, but enough to say, hey, what are you guys doing to train new animators? And these are the animators who had been around since Roy Disney Sr. used to say, hey, we can stop after 7 pictures. We don't need any more movies than that. We'll just re-release them every 7 years. And even when Walt got more interested in audio animatronics, it was like, well, maybe we'll shut down animation. Walt said, no, I started the studio with these guys. Let's keep it going along for them. Walt died. The guys figured they're out the door. And instead, they were in the middle of Jungle Book. Jungle Book made a big bunch of money. And that's when it was like, oh, we should keep this thing going. And it wasn't until the 70s that they really started. They put Eric in a position to train people. So purely, of course, that girlfriend is now my wife. So that's how to do it. That's how you get in. Anyway, so I went in, did 2 personal tests, and survived and became an in-betweener. And I was so bad as an in-betweener, I almost lost my job at Disney over that.
So to explain, just for like the layman.
An in-betweener, when you make animation, I mean, you look at a piece of film, not that people see film anymore, but, you know, classic film of many little frames. If you look at each frame, the movement changes every frame. Well, an animator does what's called the extreme poses. So if you're going to throw a ball, there'd be your hand back and then your hand forward where you release the ball. Depending on how many drawings you put in between those 2 drawings is how fast or how slow the character is going to move. Depending on where you put the drawings, like if you put more drawings back here, that's going to take more time. And then you just do a couple in the middle, and then that's going to speed up in the middle. And then maybe at the end, you slow in a little bit and add a few more drawings there. So the in-betweener is literally the guy who does the drawings in between the other drawings. The extremes would probably get a breakdown done by an assistant to the animator. And then, like I say, you get in-betweens. And I look back on it and I realized, because it finally clicked after I was when I was well into story, I said, oh, that's what I wasn't getting. It was just a conceptual thing. And I said, no, they were saying all the right words. I just was not getting it, you know. Luckily I survived.
What were the cartoons you had to do in betweens for?
On the Rescuers, on the Rescuers made it to assistant animator. I actually have one scene of Bernard Mouse creeping across the desk at Madame Medusa's pawn shop and boutique. So that I actually got a piece of animation in it. But I remember the worst scene that gave me headaches. The animator Dale Bear did the crocodiles swinging away from camera in the swamp, and they're covered with these little bumps, and I couldn't animate them right, so the bumps were moving around because my in-betweens, and you're talking about like the thickness of a pencil lead, if it's off, could screw things up. Anyway, I literally had headaches for a week and a half or whatever, however long it took me to do that. And then when I saw it on screen, they put fog over it. So it was like
brutal.
So
you drew thousands of mice over and over again. Like,
yeah, well, I mean, that's it. I mean, luckily, like I said, I was not good at it. And when I moved into story, I got a chance to work with, again, more of the Nine Men, Wooly Reitherman, and I learned a lot about animation actually from Ron Clemens. Did a fantastic third personal test of Cruella de Vil that was literally, without exaggeration, good enough to have been in the feature film. And the Nine Men, or at least not Mark Davis, who wasn't there. He was over at Imagineering, who did Cruella de Vil. He had a different thought about it. But everybody else said, like, my God, that's feature quality. Anyway, Ron was immediately snatched up by Frank Thomas to be his assistant. And Ron, but he wasn't an assistant, he was actually an animator under Frank's tutelage. And so Ron would go in with Frank and work with him and then come back to our office, which I shared with him. And then I grilled him about what he had learned. And Ron appreciated that because it made him repeat everything and, you know, learn it. So I learned a lot of stuff from Frank Thomas secondhand through Ron Clemens. So not a bad cast.
Not bad at all. But then, then you got into the engineering, and the WED Enterprises is like, so what exactly? So the Disney doesn't just make cartoons. What is WED, and what is, you know, what
WED is now known as Imagineering, and even back then, I mean, Disney, I mean, mostly was animation, live action movies, educational films, a licensing of everything, toys and all that, you know, coloring books and things like, you know, plush toys, and of course the parks, of which when I started, there was only one park named Disneyland. And then while we were there, Walt Disney World opened. I think it's just celebrating its 50th. Then, you know, after we were there for a while, they started adding things all over the world. So anyway, even back then, Disney was a very small company. That is hard for people to understand now when they own a good portion of the world. It was so small that there were times when the sound stages were used for storing 16mm films. We, in fact, went up into the catwalks of the sound stages and threw super balls off the catwalks just to see how far they would bounce. Because the stages were just, I mean, they didn't even think to rent out the stages for commercial work or anything. You know, it was just, they did like maybe 3 movies a year. And the animated films were once every 5 years. So it was a teeny tiny company. That all changed, you know, when Michael Eisner came in and Jeffrey Katzenberg, and, you know, with Roy Disney Jr. kind of masterminding a lot of that. And just a lot of what those guys did to begin with was just common sense things from Hollywood. People are saying, well, yeah, you're a movie studio, you should be doing movies, you know, a lot more movies. Suddenly they were doing like 12 films a year or something. Animation suddenly geared up. They increased the size of the staff. When I was hired, there were officially 55 people in the animation staff at feature films. I think that's not counting the ink and paint department, who would color the cells, because that was, again, on cells in the camera and all of that. Anyway, that's how small it was. Those are the people turning out, back then, Robin Hood and Rescuers and Fox and Hound and all of that. So they were really building up the department, reaching out, doing a larger training program. And meanwhile, I had moved over to Imagineering, and was after the Imagination Pavilion Award, did a space pavilion, which didn't get made, but I met George Lucas, got to talk to him about Star Wars over lunch. That was fun. And then the rest of my time was with Tony Baxter, who was one of the chief designers at Disneyland. And at Epcot, we worked on the Imagination Pavilion.
So it's like an engineering company that Disney owns, or
no, it's called that. They have an engineering side, which actually, let's put it this way: Imagineering creates the rides, the concept, the artwork, and ultimately literally creates the props that are going to go into the ride. There is an engineering side. Back then it was called MAPO, for Mary Poppins. Generally, these things were named after the movies that funded them, and they made so much money. It's like, hey, we'll build this.
Interesting.
Anyway, so if you think of Imagineering would come up with Abraham Lincoln, the engineering side would build the insides and make him actually move, and then the animators would go back and and make him move to the soundtrack and all of that. So that's basically, they're the guys who design the theme parks around the world, and special events and parades, and the costume characters all get put through that side of the company. They also design the hotels and the interior designs and the patterns on the rugs and the wallpaper, and decide whether a monorail will go around your hotel or through the hotel.
And the Wedway people mover, right?
Exactly, all that stuff. So and then as I was finishing up on the Imagination Pavilion, just as Tony said, but now's the fun part, when we get to actually build the thing. I missed that because they wanted to do a series of Epcot documentaries, and they were pulling me back to the studio for that. Ultimately, those didn't sell. I had revamped them into something that all the sponsors liked much more, but instead of doing a land film and what were some of the other ones, the transportation film with GE and Spaceship Earth and all of that, I said, no, let's make 4 documentaries. The Future Human, which would be about how we might change and bring in every science fiction idea of cybernetic,
transhumanism,
advancements, enhancements, I should say, all of that, and cloning, and just, and the idea was to do it much like Walt did in his old TV show, and Ward Kimball, do a lot of gag cartooning in it and all of that. So it was Future Human and Future Home, which talked about this new thing called the personal computer and how you could use it to design things, which is funny because like 3 years later it was like, duh. Then there was Future City, and then finally Future Earth. And glad we never got to Future Earth because it was very depressing. It was kind of like, there's going to be a lot more people on the planet. That's a problem. Anyhow, those were pitched to the networks, and the Disney had this mindset of, this is before Michael Eisner and all that. They thought things were just like when Walt was alive. Walt had all the networks begging him for programming. So he was able to say, I'll do a show. It's going to be called Disneyland, and I get to promote this new project I'm doing. Now, you got to think about how silly that sounds, because we're all used to a place called Disneyland. But if I said, I'm going to pitch a show called Tadland or Tadville, it's going to be a big success. Everybody's going to want to go to Tadville. So that's what he was pitching. But they wanted him. He was such a huge name in entertainment that they said, sure, whatever, Walt. And so he debuted on ABC. and did some great entertainment. And every once in a while it was like, oh, and here's this park he's working at, really building up the appetite for the thing. Well, these guys kind of thought they could still do that. So they go to the networks and say, here's these documentaries, because they had all the sponsors of Epcot were putting in money for these films. And the network said, we have our own news divisions to do low-rated documentaries. We don't need any from you. Plus, because the big pitch was Disney was telling all the companies, like, when Epcot opens October 3rd, or whatever it was, these will be playing in prime time every day, one after another. And it's like the network said, that's when we debut a new season. I mean, now new shows come out anytime. It used to be they always came out in September, October. It was right when the new cars came out. There used to be new model cars every year, September, and it was a big deal. The whole world looked at, what Detroit was going to turn out. Anyway, so basically Disney was saying, here, we want you to do this documentary right when you're trying to sell this brand new Gilligan's Island show, or whatever it would have been. So they suddenly went away. We had already started some animation, and we were able to at least put that together. Daryl Van Sitters was the director of it, and on it were Joe Ranft was, one of the top story guys at Pixar, Mike Giamo, who was like art director on Frozen's, both the Frozen's, and Chris Buck did Tarzan and Frozen, and all this great team of people put this stuff together with the idea of this gives them training, and maybe they'll go on to do this Roger Rabbit project, which didn't happen. Went with other people. Anyway, the guys were able to do enough animation. We cut it together, and they came up with the idea of the host being the inside of Mr. Lincoln's head. We put a bow tie on it, and it was called Fun with Mr. Future. So I think you can find it on YouTube. It's a goofy short subject, and you'll see the home computer gag. And the fun thing was this mad scientist professor, Denton Glumfield, who was basically wasting electricity and all that. It's just, at the end of it, you're going, what did I just see? But, it was a way to use the animation that we had already begun. Anyway, I'll just go real quick. After that, I kind of bounced around until they said, well, I tried going back to features. And by then I had been away and had kind of gotten raises whenever I went to a new project. And they said, we don't have a spot for you, and we can't pay you what you're getting now. And luckily, this group over in licensing wanted to do special projects because they needed animation to sell merchandise. And remember, features were only coming out once every 5 years. They needed to be on TV, and they weren't allowed. Management wouldn't let them go on TV. Basically, there was an animation strike that had just finished. They didn't want to use overseas studios, even though that was part of the deal that had been worked out. But I pitched a couple of things that they loved. I did it in like a very short amount of time. When we had a second meeting, and I already had storyboards that pitched. Mickey and the Space Pirates was one, and the other was Sport Goofy, which then became Soccer Mania eventually, although it went through many, many hands after mine, and Daryl's group did the initial pass on it, and then that broke up, and Features took it on as a training project, and it actually debuted on TV just a few months before DuckTales. And I got called into jumping ahead, I got called into the boss's office of TV animation, and because my name was on it as one of the 3 people in charge of the story. And what upset them is the story I had originally come up with involved Scrooge McDuck and Huey, Dewey, and Louie and this soccer team and all that. And basically, if you weren't paying attention, you'd think, is this DuckTales? Well, it wasn't. It was just this separate thing, but it was debuting right when they were spending all this money to put out this brand new show. So they called me in the office they wanted to yell at me. And I said, and they said, yeah. And I hadn't even looked at the credits. I said, yeah. Oh, my name was on the credits. Cool. And they were saying like, yeah, right there right in the middle there. I said, yeah. And I finally realized that they really wanted to be angry. I said, guys, I last touched this however many years before. I had nothing to do with this version. I mean, it's obviously based on my version and Daryl and the story guy's version. But, you know, basically I had nothing to do with the final thing, because a lot of what the team did to begin with is they took out a lot of the stuff I had in, which was personality stuff and heart, which is basically what we tried to put into DuckTales. And so they just treated it like a short subject. So it was more a short subject, but 22 minutes long. So they just felt like it's not what we wanted it to be. And it's like, well, had it stayed my project and I had taken more control over it, I could have ordered them to do it my way, but that's not what the mandate was at the time. So anyway, that was funny. Anyway, going back, the world changed. Michael Eisner comes in, and animation was very important. Basically Michael's philosophy was Disney is the top name in animation. It should be everywhere that animation is. It doesn't mean TV animation has to look as good as feature animation, but it should be the best stuff on TV. And same thing, no matter else, wherever else animation would be. It was so important that on the Sunday, the first Sunday after he was hired, it was there for a week, we had a meeting at his house. I was technically on vacation. They asked me to come in because it was the same group that I had worked with way back when on Mickey and the Space Pirates and Sport Goofy. And they remembered me as this guy who, in a short amount of time, came in with not just stories and dialogue, but all these drawings, you know, that I basically all the concepts sequence by sequence I had done. So they wanted me there. And that was my first thing with TV animation. We met with Michael Eisner. He looked at Mickey and the Space Pirates and he said, Mickey's too precious. You got to make sure you can do him right before we get into this. And it was Michael Eisner who said, you know what? My kids went to summer camp and they came back just talking about this candy, gummy bears. I swear, if you do anything with the name gummy bears, it'll be a success. In fact, do that. So I went back to wherever at the time. The guys struggled with the first versions of gummy bears was like, you know, Candyland with villains like Licorice Whip. In fact, they even talked about at the end, instead of a moral, they would have a dental hygiene message because of all the candy in the show. Brilliantly, they did not go that way. Art Vitello and Jim Magon got together and they looked at Asterix and Obelix and said, hey, the idea of a juice that gives you powers and a medieval story, and they came up with the gummy bears. And then sometime later, I was, within that year, that first year, I was thinking of leaving Disney because I just felt like, one, I was surprised they hadn't fired me because I was kind of floating around. And I just felt like the stuff I had been on, or at that moment, was like not something I wanted to be in. And I thought maybe I'd freelance storyboards. And I asked that to one of the guys who was going to be in charge of TV animation. He goes, oh, you don't want to do that. Why don't you come over and visit? And I'd forgotten they wanted me over there day one. I just never taken that seriously. Anyway, I ended up going over there and technically being a management person, a creative manager. But I was part of the gong shows where you come up with a million ideas to pitch to Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg. And third season of Gummy Bears, NBC wanted a change in story editors. So I replaced Jim Magon, and Jim went on to work on DuckTales. And then after that, and then I never went back to management. I was always after that, I was a showrunner, basically from Gummy Bears to Chippendale Rescue Rangers was my first, solo show, or with Alan Zaslav, and then Darkwing Duck, and then feature spin-offs after that.
So wait, before we go, because man,
no, it's too late. We're out of time.
That that was like a campfire story. I just sat about. You told me about Eisner, and it's amazing. The Eisner period it's like the period of Mao Zedong. It's hard to talk about. So it's an amazing story to get
Well, plus it's like a lot of people criticize Michael because I think he was there about 20 years. I could be wrong. People hated him in the last 10, loved him for the first 10, because what he did is just common sense things for the first 10, and the company was just making more and more money and expanding. And again, it was a different world in that. I remember I was over at Features when they were going to put Pinocchio out on VHS. And some of the animators just felt like that was sacrilege, that no, those are jewels. You can't put them out because, VHS, how could you do that?
And you got to wait 7 years for the magic to come back.
Exactly. And I said, let me ask them, do you have a copy of Pinocchio? Oh yeah, I got a bootleg. Do you have Snow White? Oh yeah, it's even got Coal Black and the Seven Dwarfs onto it. I said, well, how come you get to have it, but a huge fan of the show doesn't get to have it? That's all you're doing. You're enjoying it. People can enjoy it the same way. And of course, a year and a half later, the world had changed, and the idea of having videotapes of every movie, if like, I don't know, Citizen Kane can be on video, then certainly your cartoons can, or Godfather or whatever. So anyway, then about it kind of hit a point where just by doing common sense things expanded. And if they expanded a certain amount, if profits went up a certain amount, all these executives got bonuses, but it did get to the time where just to keep the stocks up, it's like, well, we can't, unless we find another planet, there's not much more we can do at this time. A little do they know the future, but they started cost cutting, kind of pulling back here and there. And that's when people started criticizing decisions. And I'm talking about fans,
yeah. What about
general public was super happy with, the way things are going. I mean,
what about Don Bluth though, right? So like Don Bluth walking away, the story he tells about them, the Eisner removing the animation studio, is that true, or what happened with that?
No. Here's the Don Bluth thing. They were going to hand the studio to Don on a silver platter, really, or pretty close. He was seen as, he had his own sequence on the Rescuers, so they're picking him out as, and that's something, the 9 Old Men got. It's like, no, Don, this is your sequence. They did a featurette called Small One, and Don expected to direct it. Instead, it went to Dick Sabas, and Don was going to be art director. And Don was very angry about that. That once they were given the decision in the same meeting, which he thought was the wrong way to do things. But if from the other side of the desk, if you're the boss, of course you're giving orders. You're saying you're going to do this, do that. Yes, you don't like it if you're on the other side. But Don didn't like and this is understandable, Don didn't like the idea that an executive can walk in and tell him to change something creative.
So Don Bluth is Anakin Skywalker. He's like, you're not giving me the power to be on the council.
Yeah, it's kind of, I guess, I don't know. Once I walked in, he was in a Bacta tank. It was weird. We just heard, we knock on the door and we just heard, yeah. No, he created a project, Banjo the Woodpile Cat, which he worked on, and I worked on a little bit in his garage. And finally, at the time, now in their publicity early on, they always said, when Disney found out about, they actually told them that, no, this is our way of training ourselves. We're not getting a chance on the feature. This is a way we're learning things from the ground up, and all is true. It was all great training. What wasn't true is that he was always planning on leaving, because I stopped working on it because I sucked it in between. And I said, I'm really having a time Monday through Friday. I believe it can still happen at Disney. I can't come here on the weekends and just hear about leaving and all that. So I still work with Don, like on Pete's Dragon unofficially, and kind of as this again, there are places in my career it's like, why were they giving me a paycheck? Anyway, and then I was at Imagineering when there was the walkout during Fox and Hound. And I
okay,
think,
so you're safe.
So and I think that was done with the intention of that we heard back from the animators that they kind of expected Fox and Hound to shut down. Because there was a little malicious intent in there too. And then I thought when Secrets and Nim, or no, before Secrets and Nim came out, we were at a convention and we saw a sequence that John Pomeroy had done of the owl with John Carradine and all that. It looked great. And I called them up and just to talk to John. And I guess it was one of those, Tad Stones is on the phone. What? It's like, hello. And I just was openly enthusiastic. That looked great. That was fantastic. Now, my way of looking at things, that was the best sequence in the movie when we ultimately saw it. And I think that was their strongest film because, again, just my opinion, I felt they're very weak in story in all their movies. It just didn't have that drive. And what really helped the Renaissance at Disney wasn't just the talents of Ron and John and the other young guys who were finally given a chance. It was Howard Ashman coming in with his story sense of musical theater and talking about the character expressing their I want. And, it wasn't about just, oh, you want an I want song and all this. It was like a story structure that they followed and then manipulated from time to time. But it was just, they started treating, and this is Jeffrey's influence too, they started treating animation like a real movie. I tell the story that we used to have various meetings with all the trainees or young animators, and we were all called trainees, even though we were on productions. That Don showed some films, and he would talk about mime and going to the ballet and going to plays, looking at the kind of acting they do. And I walked out with, which is all great reference stuff. I walked out with Ron Clemens, and Ron says, he always talks about theater and pantomime and all of that, but he never talks about movies. We're making movies, Ron's point was, it's not like a movie, it is a movie. The same strip of film is going through a projector and it's going up on a screen in front of the audience, and you put a soundtrack to it, and you design things and you set camera angles and all that. Those are all movie things. And yet he never talked about that. When Jeffrey Katzenberg came on, he was obviously in the opposite direction. And one of the brilliant things I think Jeffrey did is he brought on film editors at the beginning of the project, because you think in animation, you don't want to spend a lot of time animating extra things. So, stuff that you're not going to use. So you might add a little to the beginning and the end of a scene, but then your editor would basically just tighten things up or rearrange things depending on what the directors want. But Jeffrey felt like with a film editor at the beginning, he could say, can we have a shot that I can make this edit work if we have this kind of shot? And the animators can go, the storyboard guys say, sure, we can draw that up, do layout. And they could see it, put it up on animatics and really get a sense of the movie early on that really increased the cinema feel of Disney movies, in addition to all the story and emotion stuff and all of that. So that was, I just think that was a huge part of, what helped Disney films suddenly have a renaissance.
So when you jumped into becoming, part of the animation, what do you call it, leading of the story?
Well, you mean the showrunner on TV? That was after I went to TV. Yeah.
So Don Bluth seemed to have like a certain amount of control issues with other people controlling his vision, maybe, but and other animators and artists do as well. But you wanted to be able to work in the system. How have you been able to? I know you've also done Bob's Burgers storyboards and Hellboy. You have other interests besides Disney, but Disney's still part of your because if you were so young, and what part of you is not Disney, and how, and this all, you know, in the story?
Well, to me, I mean, dude, it's all about, I would pitch a show. I would come up with an idea of a show and pitch it. I mean, with Rescue Rangers, it started from a couple of guys, Ken Kuntz and David Weimers, who pitched just a title called Miami Mice, which Michael and Jeffrey loved because they loved, and Miami Vice was a huge show then. They loved tricky titles because they felt like that would promote interest. You get a little extra publicity, a little extra coverage, and hopefully more people check out your show. And it was up to you. It was always up to you to do a great show that would keep them once somebody starts watching. Miami Vice, with Jim Magon, Carl Gears, and I developed it, quickly changed the name to Metro Mice because we knew that legally that wasn't going to fly. And the first thing was like a cop show with mice. And amazingly, I found the artwork recently, and it's like mice holding guns, not guns with rubber darts, actually little guns. And what
adorable.
Anyway, Carl, we all had input, but Carl, I think, did the actual script for the pilot. He we created Fat Cat, the villain for actually that script. But what we were running up against is the typical shows of a cop show, or the typical crimes are bloody or violent, and how many jewelry stores can you rob? So we needed something broader, and so we went back into development, and we came up with the idea of just a group of characters. I mean, somewhere along the line, we didn't do a serious pitch, but at one of those meetings where we're discussing new projects with Michael Eisner and Jeffrey, and Richard Frank was another executive at the time, we said, well, we could do Rescuers because Rescuers was designed to be a series. It's based on a series of books. And Jeffrey said, no, that we're going to do a sequel, because we had never done a sequel before, but the idea was, it was hugely popular in Europe, more so than in America, the original Rescuers. And they felt like that kind of sure thing helps fund experimentation on other projects. So it's like, yeah, I can take a bigger risk on this project because I've got a moneymaker on this one. Oddly, the experiments made more money than the sure thing. Anyway, so he said, don't do Rescuers. And then when we talked about this other, having this group of adventurers, he said, you know what, make that your Rescuers, see what you can do with that. So we came up with this group of, you can see me online on some of the behind the scenes stuff, talking about it. It was like a nearsighted eagle that they would ride around on, and a chameleon, Asian cricket, an Australian kangaroo rat called Billabong, Gadget, who was pretty much Gadget as she ended up, Zipper, who ended up being Zipper, and the lead of the show is called Kit Colby, who is this mouse with a aviator's jacket with a sheepskin collar and a leather jacket. Pitched it and pitched the type of stories we had, and this was the same meeting where because it was the second season of the DuckTales, or it was going to be, and they wanted something to publicize. They felt like, if we're going to do new episodes, we don't want to just say, hey, we're doing more of that thing you liked. Instead, it was like, we need more coverage, so create some new characters. So I pitched Space Duck, which they did not like, Bubba Duck, a little caveman duck, which they did like, Robo Duck, because RoboCop had come out the summer before. And so I said, here's Fenton Crackshell, he's Robo Duck, who obviously became Gizmo Duck later on.
Right.
And they liked all that. And then we talked about, and they liked this Rescue Rangers idea, but they didn't like the lead character. And I kind of said, well, maybe I didn't pitch it right. And they said, no, Ted, we got those guys in 2 lines. That's what we need on this character. We're just not feeling him yet. We then go on to a different part of the meeting. Now, Jim Magon remembers this differently. He was saying, he kind of saw it coming, he feels. And he said, I remember we looked at each other. I said, I'm sorry, that's not my memory. I was just like staring down at my paper of here's the Disney classics. I was mentally on to the next part of the meeting, knowing that I got to figure out that other thing. We just went down the list of what else can we do, like DuckTales. So Mickey Mouse, no, he's still too important. Donald Duck is kind of in DuckTales, and he's really hard to draw, or not just draw. I mean, to animate, because that back then it was like we kept looking at the old short subjects where he waddles, as opposed to simplifying it for TV. Goofy, they said yes, he can be a detective, he could be this or that. Yeah, develop Goofy, and they weren't going to do Pluto, and they weren't considering the female characters. And we got to Chip and Dale, and it was Michael Eisner who said, put those chipmunks in that show. And Jeffrey said, home run. So because we had two leads, we had to thin out the cast, all too good. I think the getting rid of the eagle would have been hard to work in the stories anyway. So instead, Gadget created the Ranger plane.
What if they had taken Gadget? What if they had taken Gadget and turned her into, a horse or a butterfly or something like that? How would that have made you feel as an artist that had created a character?
Well, they didn't. They were really good in that. They didn't. Exactly what I said. They gave their people, their executives who give decent notes, and their executives who give bad notes. Even going back to Wooly Rhythm and the Nine Old Men on features, he was great at spotting weaknesses. He would sometimes try to come up with an answer right then. And the rule we were told by other storymen were like, his instincts are perfect, and that, yeah, it is a problem. Don't necessarily take his quick fix that he came up then. Figure out if it works or not, or is there a different way to go? And that's kind of like, they gave the right note. You don't have a strong enough lead to anchor this show. Use these guys who are Disney stars, put them in. And it was like, they didn't tell me how to, okay, get rid of this guy or that guy. That was up to me to say, oh, we don't need this person, we don't need that, and Jim and I worked on that together. And then I wrote the Bible, Jim looked over it, and then our management said, you can't both be on the show, because we were like the two creative leads of TV animation. So Jim gave notes and I did the show. Anyway, so that's a good note. They wouldn't say make Gadget a butterfly. Other bad executives might say, hey, butterflies are, or My Little Pony's huge, make her a horse. My response would be, that's worse than the eagle. They're little mice and they have to go and have this adventure. What's the horse going to do? And then you say, is it a magical horse? And it shrinks down, or you're just out there grasping at ideas. So that's the thing about executive notes. You have good ones, you have bad ones. Jeffrey, one, people talk about like the new Rescue Rangers movie making changes to the original show, the concept of the original show. And I said, what do you think I did? The mice, if the internet existed and we listened to fans, Rescue Rangers wouldn't exist. It would be chipmunks stealing walnuts from Donald Duck or something. It's like, that's all they had done in the past. So you take your stars and your concept or whatever, and you create something new. With Darkwing Duck, his origin is that Jeffrey ordered me to do a Double O Duck show. They had done an episode of DuckTales called Double O Duck. He says,
have a real quickly, I just have to say,
that is great. I told you that I couldn't find my pin. Somewhere in the bottom of a drawer somewhere is my pin of that, hopefully. He specifically said, it can't be Launchpad. The whole point is to create a new character. But again, they like the gimmicky title. So we created this other show, brought in his daughter, Goslin, and then pitched that. They liked it. It had heart to it. My first thing I didn't like the idea of Double O Duck. I did a parody show, and Jeffrey said, it's just a parody show. I don't like it, So we agreed that I had screwed up. Luckily, instead of assigning it to somebody else, he gave me another chance. And one of my story editor, again, briefly back then, instead of being hired for a show, you were hired for like 2 years with an option for another 1 year or something like that. You do a contract over time. And that meant you weren't assigned to one show. You were just employed as a creative person at TV animation, meaning if you needed to brainstorm something, you could bring in guys from other show for an afternoon and just talk about stuff. Well, I brought in a bunch of guys who I knew I wanted to be story editors on the show if I ever went. And one of them was Dwayne Capizzi. He looked at that pin and the artwork like it, and he said, he looks more like a pulp character than a spy, like Green Hornet or the Shadow. And that light bulb went off in my head because I love that stuff. I mean, I didn't grow up with it, but I knew about it through my comic fandom. And so suddenly that was a unique way of doing a spy, a different group of characters. Like Doc Savage had all these eccentric guys who worked with him. I said, yeah, that gets us away from the James Bond Q and all of that. And then we lost the rights to use the name because we never had the rights to use the name. But by that time, we were already selling the show. And we had a contest to rename him. And Alan Burnett came up with the name Darkwing. I added Duck to it. Alan was around for a while, then left and went to do Batman at Warner Brothers. And he went and helped Bruce Timm put that show together, and at Radomski and the other guys and Paul Dini. And Alan was there until his retirement. I think he had a hand in every single superhero project over there, if not, everything. So the old gag that I constantly repeat is we warmed him up for the Dark Knight with the Duck Knight. Anyway, so Jeffrey, there are guys who worked there at the time who assumed we based Darkwing on Double Duck and an episode of DuckTales called The Masked Mallard, where Scrooge was like a superhero character. And I, to this day, have not seen that episode. It's like, no, I can tell you exactly where it came from. It came from an order from Jeffrey Katzenberg. That's what started it.
That's actually like a pretty big saying in Hollywood. It came from an order from Jeffrey Katzenberg.
Yeah. And then after that, Darkwing, I pitched a science fiction show, but just all the lower executives liked it, but not our boss at TV animation. He just didn't get it. And I'd worked on it in my spare time. So I'd done all this artwork, and then he just didn't get it. And later on, he pitched it an entirely different show, but he used all my artwork. And I said, well, you poisoned it. I can't repitch the show in a different way because they've now seen it. It didn't matter anyway, because that's when they said, because of my feature background, they put me on Aladdin. And I went and talked to Ron and John because I felt weird about that. And it was like, they were fine with it. And, the big thing on Aladdin, aside from, coming up with these great stories, and this was a lot of fun, and bringing back Iago was a great character.
Yeah, I guess I should also ask really quickly how much of an interaction you had with Gilbert Gottfried.
Well, I mean, recorded with him every week. I mean, he was by phone in New York. But it was funny, the first time he came on, there was a thing where it was like, is this the right guy? Because Gilbert was just this guy, and then he puts on the character, and that made all the difference in the world. It was funny, I had a similar experience, except kind of the opposite experience with John Hurt, who played Professor Broom in Hellboy, in that when he came on, he was in London, I think, at the time. We were doing a digital patch, so I'm not seeing him. It's all through the phone. He's just sounding so old, and I'm thinking, ooh, is this going to be a problem? And then Mike Mignola, I think, I'm pretty sure was there, and he said hello, and it turned out, no, John Hurt was already in character. He popped out of character, and it was like, yeah, he's full of energy and all that. It was like, oh, okay. So I had two similar, digital patch things for that. So after Aladdin, I did the other big landmark thing in Aladdin was we were doing a 5-part opening, as we always did. We'd do a multi-part introduction to our shows, which we would then show as a quote feature on Friday nights before the show started in syndication, which was roughly feature length. And I called up home video, a middle management guy I had met, and all I was trying to do was keep our budgets up because budgets were starting to be cut. And I said, if we can bring in another source of revenue, we can keep our budgets up, which turns out not to be true. It's like, hey, look at all this extra money we made. No, your budget's still low. Anyway, strangely, home video wasn't. I said, basically, I'm doing the sequel to Aladdin, and home video wasn't really interested in it until they released Aladdin on home video on VHS, and they made scads of money. I called back the same guys, and this time when it went up, they were very interested. And at one point, our TV boss gave a bunch of notes. And I said, okay, but we got to do these notes. We got to get this done by whatever it was, March 27th. And he goes, why? I said, because home video is interested in doing it. He goes, that's gravy. Don't worry about that. Just worry about the show, which in essence, he was correct. Worry about the content, not about a false deadline. But he left the room, and this had to be pointed out to me afterwards because I had forgotten this. They said, no, what you said was, we have to do the notes, but it has to be done by that date. We got to get this to home video. And that turned into the Return of Jafar, which was a huge moneymaker, you know.
One of my favorite movies as a kid. I love that one.
And that's the thing. I've stopped saying bad things about it because I realize now it's very beloved. But at the time,
the target audience was 4. You didn't remember that.
Well, here's a brief thing. For a while, I was going to, after Return of Jafar, they were going to have me. We did a second one that I felt better about, King of Thieves, and Robin Williams came back and all that. But I and some of the writers were going to do, in fact, Bob Schooley and Mark McCorkle, who created Kim Possible, who's currently having their 30th anniversary, I think, maybe 20th or 30th, 20th maybe. Anyway, we were supposed to do a sequel to Lion King. So I went to the LA Zoo and just to their bookshop to pick up a bunch of stuff. And I got all the stuff that I normally couldn't buy myself, but got to use the company credit card type thing, and put it on there up at the clerk. And she goes, oh, wow, what's this all for? And I said, well, we're doing a video, you know, with the Lion King and all that. She goes, oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And she's now taken my credit card. I cannot leave because she has my credit card. I mean, it's not even the company credit card. I would have to be reimbursed. And she goes, oh, that's wonderful. I love the Lion King. And as she's ringing it up, she says, just don't make it like that Return of Jafar. And just went in about how terrible it was. It was nothing like Aladdin. And it was so on. And I was just becoming tinier and tinier and tinier, just saying, please let me go.
Wow.
And just had to take that and run. But so everybody loves what they saw when they were a kid. You know,
but okay, so did you have goals that didn't get realized, or was that your intention with the film? I mean, or was it, how do you feel about
Return of
really?
Jafar?
Yeah, well, really.
Here's the thing, and it made me much beloved by management, but basically I always brought things in on time and on or under budget. Whereas I had some of my directors, I mean, we used to literally ship things overseas, meaning artwork was put into boxes and taped up. And there was no digital pipeline. And I had directors who, I'd swear, they were still drawing and making marks as the assistants are trying to tape the box shut. And the guy's arm is still in there, just making one final correction. And I look back and I think I should have had more of that, you know, to really push, because I can't, it's very hard for me, other than maybe the Australian episodes, to like watch Darkwing Duck. It's one of my career highlights, you know. I enjoyed it immensely, but now I look at it and I only see things I want to change. I see the weaknesses, and certainly editing has changed over the 30 years. So it's like, I could probably take 4 minutes out of every episode, just punching things up and improving the timing. And plus, I remember when we did Rescue Rangers, I felt like, we're losing stuff that was in the script, meaning just you always want to plus things. I just felt like we're losing gags because they didn't get staged as dramatically or humorously or whatever. And with Darkwing, I thought that percentage was much, much better of how much got through. But still, it was like we were working under crazy schedules, nothing like the schedules they have these days. But at the end of the day, I felt my job was the calendar is my boss. It has to be done by that time, and we'll be as clever as we can, and we'll try to fix things in board, and we'll try to add cool music and sound effects, ultimately, but it's got to be done at the certain time. I told this on another podcast that some of our guys went and worked for Warner Brothers and came back and all that, and one of them was saying like, yeah, generally we got to throw out like maybe 3 Tiny Toon scripts every season, and my mouth dropped. It's like, one, you had a schedule that you actually had scripts done ahead of time, and you could say this isn't good enough, or I'll hold this, maybe we can improve it. I never got to do that. If it was like, oh, it's not what I want it to be, but these gags are working, but I'd love to make another pass, but it's Thursday, here you go, start boarding. So that's when you talk about Return to Jafar or any of my episodes of my favorite shows, I look back and say, oh, I wish I could make that better. I never, once I left Disney, all my projects had smaller and smaller budgets, and it looked like my last show actually would be for Disney. And I said, oh my God, I'm going to get to end my career with a budget again. And that didn't work out. But I did, I was just looking at a sequence. On the other hand, after Disney showed me the door, I did The New Adventures of Brer Rabbit at Universal on DVD. And I got the chance to this basically design characters, and then this one sequence, I storyboarded it, I art directed it, meaning I literally painted all the key scenes not final painting, but just color it, because it was a very graphic sequence, kind of a tribute to Pink Elephants on Parade. But it was like, yeah, I never got a chance to do that at Disney, to actually make this whole sequence my own and put it to music and see the effects, and that was great. So those little things were fantastic.
But there's something nice about being rushed also, because they can't censor or change your art. If the more time they have to change something, the more likely it is to happen. If something's rushed through because it has to be out, then whatever you have, it's like South Park. That's why their show exists, right? So,
but they're in charge of their own stuff, basically. Let's put it this way: they can always screw you over when you're talking about bad executives. One of the things that would have been I loved Hellboy, and I felt like I'm never going to get a chance to do Hellboy, but this Atlantis series could be my Hellboy, because they can be about supernatural elements. We could tell all these mysterious stories and all that. When the movie came out and didn't do well, we had to shut down. I literally had to lay off 80 people on Friday the 13th, I believe.
Donald Duck's birthday.
Yeah. Anyway, we got to put 3 episodes together with some additional material called Milo's Return. The most Lovecraft story, I don't know if it was literally my script. It felt like it. I think it was. Or I heavily rewrote somebody else. Anyway, it was about the Kraken coming up and this village being under this foggy, desolate place, and everybody's practically a zombie. At the end, and there's only one woman who's nice to them as they're investigating this village. And she always talks about her little one, because her little baby was in swaddling clothes. And it's kind of like, my little one has no future here because of this evil that's all around her in control. And you think it's the evil mayor who is controlling this kraken beast out in the water. And the twist, spoilers, is no, the kraken beast is controlling the mayor and the town and all that. The guys defeat the kraken, everything, the fog goes away, everybody is released from the gloom. And the original ending was that they're on the beach and they're saying, well, now they have a future here, like Mrs. So-and-so and her little one, just because that's how, just referring to the baby and they're waving at them from the cliffs. And the original thing was, she talks to her baby and says, just my little one, now you have a future here, or whatever she said. And she walks away from camera, and a tentacle comes out of the swaddling cloth and wraps around her neck lovingly, which was a great, creepy ending to that.
There's no reason they can't. Your people can make a difference to the world, like we did here. Now that there's no kraken, it's left to people like Inger Eliasson to raise their little ones in peace.
We can never thank them enough. Now you can grow big and strong, and someday be the most important person in town. Now give Mama a big hug. Oh, that's my little one.
It's better than Avatar, arguably.
The executive in charge of that hated that. So, but he never said take it out. He just didn't like it. And another executive who was basically running the place until this guy was put in above him, was saying it's a genre piece that totally fits. Anyway, we go to the fight. We get to cut this all together. We go to the final mix, and it gets to that scene, and that executive is just pissed. He says, I said that was out and all that. So we had spent all this money on the final mix. We have to undo it all, quickly re-edit so that doesn't happen, that basically we take out that scene with the tentacle and all that. But then time goes by, and they're putting it on DVD. And I called up the guys at Home Video and said, are you guys like interested in like any cut footage and special scenes? Oh, we love stuff like that. That's the whole hype. And I said, there is this. And then I said, is there a way that once they've seen it, you can select an option so that when you watch the show, you get that ending instead of the other one? They say, yes, we can do that. That is amazing. Anyway, this comes through, and I don't know who said it out loud, but that same executive heard about that option and said, absolutely not. Now I'm thinking, okay, so an adult or a family watches this movie, watches the extra scene, decide, ooh, we like that extra scene. What would it be like with the movie? He says, and you're saying, no, you can't do that. Now, I'm not going to say any of that out loud, because I know that if I put up an argument, that scene wouldn't even be on the DVD. And it was. You didn't get the option, but that, I felt that was this great creepy ending. It would have been a great series. It was just fantastic before they started giving notes. So when you say a rush thing keeps them from interfering, I beg to disagree. I mean, there it was. We were on the mixing stage. It was the final day. Money had been spent, and instead, they're redoing this thing at the end. Anyway, after that, instead of doing more home videos, or was it after that? No, it was before that. We did Hercules, and then Buzz Lightyear, Star Command, and Atlantis, which didn't get made. And then a little after that, they basically showed me the door. And after 30 years at Disney, it was like time to find out what's out there. And then I did, my favorite thing out there was I had said famously, I will never get a chance to do Hellboy. I got to do Hellboy. And so we produced two, very tight budget, very tight schedule. Got to write a third one, which I think Mike and I both felt, Mike Mignola, that it would be the best one. The company got sold, and the new company, which was Stars, said, we don't want to put our own money into stuff. And then I was unemployed for about a year and a half. Then I did some scripts for Generator Rex. And then moved over to, what was that called? It was Neighbors from Hell. Storyboarded on that. Jen Coyle saw that I got hired for that. Jen is now doing the Harley Quinn show, amazingly. And then storyboard on Bob's Burgers. And while I was at Bob's Burgers, actually was able to do a pilot for a Disney show called Beverly Hills Chihuahua, based on a movie. And that kept me sane, because Bob's is a hilarious show. For me, it's a script-driven show. We weren't in charge of scripts. That was writers from 20th Century. And you know, you couldn't add a gag. So me, as a guy who sees himself as a storyteller,
creative.
Yeah, and you know, it's like I had fun moving things around, because we were doing this by then all digitized. So you not only did your story digitally, you can push a button and you'd see an animatic would happen. And there was a scene where Bob was drunk and returned to the kitchen, and it was more animated than the show was. So they actually had to take my board, cut,
Oh no.
you know, frames out of it. Well, no, I had fun doing it, but it was like, it was not a fully animated show. And my little storyboard thing was.
You were a Buddhist monk doing a Sandman doll of Donald Duck. That's brutal.
And then the final thing I did was a show for Netflix called Kulapari Army of
Right.
Frogs.
I love the frog show, actually. That's one of my favorites. I thought that was pretty
That
fun.
was a weird situation, in that I only did the first season, in that I was brought on just to direct, but they had hired, and they're based on these books, and the client was very hands-on, or tried to be, but really wasn't up to the task, I feel. I said, oh, those people are doing the writing. What scripts have they done? Oh, they haven't done scripts. And I said, animation scripts. They haven't done animation. I said, well, what live action scripts have they done? They've never done scripts. I went, uh-oh. And I got an outline that made no sense at all, and was a production nightmare. So I ended up rewriting. I had to rewrite their feature in literally the first one in 2 weeks, I want to say. And then the second one I had to rewrite while I was directing the first one. And they, in fact, when we said, oh, they're going to do more episodes, the writers, I mean, I told them what I was doing and all that, and they appreciated what I had done. But they said, we're just going to tell them we're not going to do it, that they should just give the scripts to you. And I said, guys, I can't do that. I'm directing the other two movies already, you know. You have to at least take the first shot at this. What was cool about that production is we use Cartoon Conrad, a studio in Canada, and the nature of the system was they did pencil tests, even though it was mostly flash animation. And that was something I hadn't done since features, because I'd never done animatics on any of my shows. I always fought them, because I said the animatic is a way to get the executives to play filmmaker, and that's going to cause trouble. And that was absolutely true. But then on Atlantis, it's like, now I want animatics. And they said, we don't have it in the budget. So anyway, I got to end up giving notes on rough animation. So I was working with the actual animators. I worked with their effects department, all teleconferencing. And it was a great experience. Those guys, Cartoon Conrad, are just fantastic studio, and fantastic to work with. And then I think I did one more writing project for Splash, but turned out my financial guy said, it would be smarter for you to retire now than wait a year from now, because of the way the payments work. So I said, works for me. And then right about that time, I got my first invitation to go to a convention, which got me into doing commissions and artwork, just because I had nothing to sell at a convention. Disney owned everything. I couldn't do prints or anything.
Yeah, it's like the monkeys, man. It's crazy.
Yeah. So anyway, that's my quick overview of the various things. And then so cool, all this time later, there's a Rescue Rangers movie, which I had nothing to do with. And then when I saw the trailer, I thought, oh, this is great. This is a fresh way of doing things. To me, it doesn't affect my show. My show is its own universe. It's like, oh, they're treating it as if those like Roger Rabbit. And people were attacking online. That's when I made the point about, I didn't do a show about Donald Duck and Walnuts. You know, I changed things drastically. And because I wasn't fighting with people, I just pointed out, no, this is like this. And I've said this before, but one of the strangest comments, and I understood what they were getting at, but people said, this concept is saying that show we loved is fake. Yeah, because I wrote them and we drew them. They weren't real, you know. So
there was
anyway,
an episode of Rescue Rangers that I remember. I'm sorry, because as a kid, I remember there's an episode where they meet, isn't it right? They meet, they go to like, isn't it like a parallel dimension, and they see that they're famous in another place for being Rescue Rangers?
I think that's Darkwing. There was a
Darkwing. There's a Darkwing, right?
Yeah, he went back. We see, that's the thing. When
that is the most meta thing I've ever seen. Darkwing Duck in general.
One of my favorite Darkwing Duck episodes was called Comic Book Capers. I think that's it, or Comic Book Classics, whatever. But the idea that somebody's doing Darkwing Duck comic and it's making Darkwing look cowardly, and he hates that, so he decides to write the script, and the story changes depending on who's writing the script, including Megavolt the villain and Binky from next door and Goslin going nuts. And at one point, somebody puts a coffee cup on the artwork, and in the adventure, Launchpad and Darkwing run into a giant coffee cup, you know, and have to walk around it to go on. There's a little running gag was a character, and I just loved breaking the fourth wall and doing all that. And that was like before Aladdin when we started that. And I remember a mid-executive who was a very smart guy, actually a creative guy, but he said, if you've got a guy that you can drop an anvil on, he's not hurt, how do you have any suspense? How do you cut to a commercial and have them come back after commercial? And I said, because he'll look scared and we'll play scary music. And it was a total cheat, and it 100% worked. It was like, my goal with Darkwing was to take like a Warner Brothers short subject, make it 22 minutes long, and give it Disney heart. And I got to, once we lost that Double O Duck name, I got to put him squarely in the silliness of the Silver Age of comics. And the Silver Age of comics was way goofier than anything you guys would know about, you know. This Jimmy Olsen turning into a turtle man, or the Elastic Lad, or Superman, or the Flash becoming literally a marionette, or people aging, people getting fat, people, you know, needing their duplicates, you know, alternate universes and all of that. And we did all of that with Darkwing.
So yeah, that was actually a question I had, because, you know, you've done Hellboy, and I can see in Darkwing Duck, like the Lovecraft, I think you might have mentioned as well, this idea of, you know, there's his witch girlfriend and the dream space-time reality that he goes to, and all of these crazy. So how did you, you know, create these subjects? Does it come from just Silver Comics, or where did these ideas come from?
Basically, it's what I grew up with. I grew up with, you know, these Silver Age of comics, loved science fiction films and action films, Star Trek, you know, Lost in Space, less so. I was more of a Star Trek guy. Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, just, you know, all that Twilight Zone, Outer Limits. These are all classic shows that were just somehow as drawn to the fantasy side of things. And Darkwing. And then when I went to TV animation, all the guys say, hey, do you want to go to the comic store? And I had collected Marvel comics. I discovered them pretty much in their first year of publishing. So I had a lot of the early stuff, but then stopped when I went to college, basically. They say you want to go to the comic book store. And I said, what's a comic book store? And that was, oh, here's where you buy comics. Because I grew up with comics everywhere on spinner racks and in supermarkets and all of that. And that was the perfect time, because about in that first year or second year, like Dark Knight came out, Watchmen, Camelot 3000, all this groundbreaking stuff, and graphic novels were taking off, and all that was inspiration. So it wasn't just old memories, it was being excited about the new stuff. So with Darkwing, one thing, thank God the internet wasn't graphic at that time. It was around, but it was mostly just print based, because a lot of stories came from my memories of Flash, specifically covers of saying, oh, I remember that Flash story. And I'm so thankful that I didn't have the resources to look it up, because I probably would have said, okay, we can't steal this, I have to do something else. But if I half remember something, I don't remember any of the details, and you can't copyright an idea. So it's like, I remembered the idea that I'm forgetting the guy, Gardner Fox, claimed at one point that he dreamed up the adventures of the Flash, the original Flash, and that created the first crossover story at DC Comics, where Flash went back or crossed into another dimension and met Jay Garrick, the Flash, and the famous cover of the two of them running toward camera to save some guy. That kind of memory of, oh, he dreamed he was tapping into a different dimension, led to that Darkwing Duck episode where Darkwing's in this world of humans, and and the end gag of that, because they're stealing the ideas, and and he's not getting a cut of the merchandise. The ending episode is he got mad at them because they had this helmet that would let them tap into the other dimension, and it gets shorted out. And the end gag was you move in on the helmet and you can hear Rescue Rangers away. Like they're now that's a different universe. They're going to steal all the Rescue Ranger ideas. So it was that, again, half remembered comic idea, just free form. One of our popular episodes, my favorite, was Twin Peaks. Jan Stranad, who is a great comic writer and worked with, blanking on the name, Corbin, these famous comics, if you do the research, but he wanted to do Twin Peaks. And I said, that's a great idea. I said, but it has to work for kids or adults who have never seen the show. And he took a stab at it. His outline was like, no, it doesn't have the real humor in it or whatever. It's all based on having seen the other stuff. It's just referential. And I said, you know what? I basically took over the episode from him, because I said, it's unfair to you. Only I will be able to make the decision on what's close enough, but not too close, or what depends. I'm just going to have to do it. And I had a great time with that. Worked in Gary Larson gags at the end. And what worked for me is one of my story editors had never watched Twin Peaks, and he loved the feeling of that show. And he says, that's so great, we should do more of those. And it was kind of like, yeah, what other episodes or whatever TV series can we do a parody of, yet change it so it's its own thing? And great idea. We never did it because, again, our schedule was, yeah, that's a great idea, but I have this idea about an escaped alien prisoner who lands on the planet and we think he's a pet. Okay, we'll go with that because that's the idea that's staring me in the face, and I think it's a funny idea. We just never had the time to relax and say, okay, let's go back. Should we do another Twin Peaks kind of episode? Is there anything else? We just didn't have the time. We had to zoom ahead.
Man, so you created so many ideas that got put into other characters, and now Buzz Lightyear is coming out. Buzz Lightyear is going to be the next thing that people critique, whether it's good or bad. And there's already a huge social push against Disney changing characters and there's going to be a kiss or something. I mean, do you feel
changing which characters on?
I mean, I forget because I don't know the whole story. I just heard that there's a bunch of people upset about a kiss in the Buzz Lightyear movie, which is going to be.
I've not heard that. Okay,
this is a lesbian kiss in the new Buzz Lightyear movie. But I mean, there's a lot of romance in a lot of Disney movies, and I don't know if it's. I just wonder what you kind of think about what do you think needs to be put into the characters? What matters?
Well, here's the thing, and what was cool about the Chippendale Rescue Rangers movie is that I pointed this out in an interview at the premiere that I got to go to. Chippendale have had shows since then. They have one on right now. They're not wearing a Hawaiian shirt and a leather jacket. They're back to being a whole different design, but they're back to being little chipmunks in nature. It was so cool to see our version of Chippendale be remembered and turned into this movie, and I think a very funny movie too. Whereas Lightyear, it was like, okay, are they going to do any nods to our series at all? And as far as I know, there aren't. But what the director has said is, no, what this is Star Wars. Star Wars, which created all these cool Luke Skywalker toys, except they're Buzz Lightyear toys. That's what Andy bought. They're based on this movie. And then somebody got the licensing right and said, we're going to do a cartoon show, except they said, oh, we need different characters. We're going to add in Mira Nova and this little robot guy and all that. So that's basically, you won't see any of that because that was done by some cartoon studio that got the rights to do a Buzz Lightyear TV show based on this Buzz Lightyear movie that we're going to see. So it's not like this is a reality. It's not like in Andy's world, there's an astronaut who's from the future or anything. It's no, this was the blockbuster movie that probably had a bunch of sequels that Andy's all jazzed about. And that begat, merchandise in a cartoon show. So, it's like, that's great. It's not stepping on our stuff. On the other hand, it's like, well, it'd be nice if there was, maybe there is. It'd be nice if there was an Easter egg or two, or, our XR, our little robot, rolling through the background or something. What I've seen looks fantastic. Again, I'm a person who is not a purist, and I have fans that are both way open. That they love the new Rescue Rangers movies, and then there's some who, and this is true of a lot of fans, when they say, oh, there's going to be a reboot, they want the exact same show they grew up with, just more episodes of it. And the thing is, the first thing a studio asks when you say, oh, we've got this property, Rescue Rangers, or, let's do more, the first question is why? Not why would you want to do that? It's just like, no, give me the reason why people will be interested in this. Oh, it was a great show, and it's got all these little cool characters. It's like, okay, we'll rerun that show. We still own it. We'll just put that on. It's like, you have to tell us why we're going to spend $70 million on your idea. And it sat around, didn't quite hit it until finally the new writers came on and they hit this. And I don't know how much of this came from the original pitch, because I knew there was interest in a pitch, and then from a writer and director working with Mandeville Films, and then new writers came on. So I don't know how much of a springboard was there, but they certainly knew the show, and through the research, they were very good about the show. And then when Akiva Schaffer, who's the director of it from Lonely Isle, he said when, I think he got this, I'm probably messing with the years, but I think he got the script in 2018, and it was already dated like 2017 or 2016. So it was already like, oh, this has been around for a while. People are reworking it. So anyway, they got to do all the Easter egg stuff. I thought they did a great job of it. The reason why it has cell shaded CG for Chip, who's supposed to be 2D animated, is totally a budget thing. It's like, to do that by hand animation would literally add $20 million to the budget. This was not a small budget film, but it didn't have enough money to hand animate everything. And that is why for the main characters, they're cell shaded CGI. For somebody who just has a bit part, like Lumiere, oh no, that's an animator doing that. It's cheaper. You're not going to build a model of Lumiere in the computer and spend all that time just to then cell shade. It's like, no, it's cheaper to hire an animator. And the Roger Rabbit, it was actually done by somebody who was on Roger Rabbit, got to animate that Roger Rabbit scene. Now, I think the animation on Chip, the acting animation is great. When they're like dancing or something, it was like, okay, it feels like old rotoscope animation, which I was not a fan on in Snow White. I'm not a fan on it, when I see it used like that, because you really want to see the stretch and squash. And they didn't have, you can get that. They did not have the time and the animator expertise to give that kind of detailed note and then get that fixed. But his acting, when you've got, the kind of dry acting of John Maloney, it's like they got nuance out of his face and emotion that, arguably was like a subtext of the performance, so I was really impressed with that, but all in all, I just think they did a great job on the movie. It was hilarious, and it does not affect the original show. Is not fake. It is its own universe. It's like, why are you people discussing that? Have you not seen Doctor Strange? Have you not seen the Snyderverse? Have you, how many multiverses do we deal with on a daily basis? Anyway, it's like that still exists. That's still, if they want to do another Rescue Ranger show, in theory, they could base it on that one, or they could base it on the movie, or base it on a brand new thing. But bad news for people who want more of the same show they grew up with. That's probably never going to happen, in that Animaniacs was the closest to that when they rebooted. DuckTales, I thought it
still was a little edgy.
Yeah. I think they did a decent job of it. DuckTales was a great show, the 2017 version. Wonderful. But it ultimately didn't move the needle enough. It's kind of like, we spent all this money, it's a great show, and it had an audience, but it wasn't like, oh, everybody's talking about the new DuckTales. Whereas, but
then there's like shows they hid, like Three Caballeros, where you could only get it in iTunes Philippines for the first like 10 years. So yeah. I mean,
that didn't move the needle either. It was,
how is it going to move the needle if you could only iTunes Philippines? No one else could see that show until Disney Plus.
Well, I mean, there was reasons because of that, but the point is, if it became a huge, crazy hit in the Philippines, it would have been all of it. That's the whole point. People say, but look at the quality. It had fantastic quality, but it didn't. And I love the new DuckTales, but the audience, it didn't bring in more people. The neat thing about the new movie is I've watched reaction videos of guys who love Rescue Rangers, haven't thought about it in 30 years. They don't collect figures. They're just, I love that show when I was a kid. And they love the movie. I've seen reaction videos of guys who never watched the show and they liked it, and then there's people who don't like it. But to me, it's like different universes. You can not like this concept and still laugh at it, or not if it's too much. But somebody commented, why didn't they ignored the history of Chip and Dale with those early short subjects? They just pretended they met each other just a few years ago. And it's like, or 30 years ago. It's like, these aren't documentaries. It's a movie. And there's no are you saying that the movie would have been better if they said, oh no, they're not 35-year-old chipmunks, they're 85-year-old chipmunks? That'll make a much better movie. Yeah, we'll get a lot of gags out of that. These geriatric guys who have to, take steroid shots or something to move around,
Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon as the chipmunks or as the Rescue
Rangers. Exactly. There you go.
Good.
See, there's a pitch. So that's the thing. It's like, this is the show the movie they chose to make, and with its idea, and they did a great job of playing around in that idea. If somebody could come along and say, the old cliche is, here it is, Rescue Rangers in space. We'll take Rescue Rangers, the hottest movie of 2022, and Buzz Lightyear, the other hottest movie in 2022. We're going to put them together. Rescue Rangers year, or Late Chipmunks, or, I don't think anybody's having those conversations.
By the way, if anyone is having those conversations, please reach out to Tad Stone and hire me with him so we can do. And if it's Josie and the Pussycats in space, we'll do that too. That's
there
fine.
you go.
Well, also, you've been doing so many crazy things throughout your life, and it seems like you have all the greatest ideas. Whatever show, whichever greatest idea in that show that you've worked on, that's the greatest idea of the show. So I wonder, what's the teenage superhero comic book series you're working on right now, right? Or what's your passion project that you're not telling us about?
Here's the thing. Well, because there isn't one really, although I was rethinking it from a different point of view just yesterday. But here is the thing. I always thought when I retired, I'd start playing around with comics. And then I retired and I started working on the comic idea. I have a very small office. The space between me and this wall is pretty much the same space from the front of the desk to that wall. It's tiny. And my wife said, you can't spend 18 hours a day in that little room. That can't be your retirement. And I realized, I didn't trade a well-paying career in animation for a non-paying career in comics. And it's like, because I tend to think in terms of series as opposed to one-shots, because that's what I've done in my career. If I do a good job on this comic and they like it, they'll want me to do more. And then suddenly I'll have a job.
Like Stan Lee, though, you'll be telling people you'll have tweeners,
Yeah, but that's, in this case, the whole point of doing comics is to do it yourself, is to have, that was my idea. But so I kind of put that aside. I played with, should I just write it and all that? And then I played around with learning how to paint. So it's, as far as those ideas, there's basically two ideas that I had pitched as animated shows at one time or another. I made sure I had the rights to them if I did pitch them somewhere. And one was a science fiction show. And I realized that is a wonderful animated concept, because there's three characters, animal, vegetable, and mineral, who morph into different shapes. And it's like, yeah, that's great in animation. In a book, it's like, you don't get to see that animation. It's just like, you can do it, but it's not the right medium for the idea. The other is, my pitch was always, when most kids were worried about acne, Emran broke out in wings. And the idea was, there's this kind of loner girl who one day wakes up to find wings growing out of her back that she can't control. She's floating up. She floats. Her mom's already leaving for work. She, gets to the door trying to yell at her mom, and she starts falling up, and she goes up into the clouds and almost gets run over by a 747. She ultimately finds out she's half fairy, and she's kind of a goth girl. And worse, she finds out that her father was part of the fairy royal family. So technically she's a fairy princess. So, I mean, it was a lot of fun, and she had a little ogre kind of guy who helped her out called Carbuncle, and I create a lot. I actually published an anthology comic 10 years ago, along with some other artists, and then totally reworked it. But it's not something, again, what I'm trying to figure out these days is, because I just turned 70, and I realize I'm older than the 9 old men were when we started working there. And I always thought those old guys, which just makes me think, oh, I was such an idiot. What did I say?
That's what I'm wondering, though. Like, because did you think of them as young? You didn't, because I think of you as rather young. you know, even though I know
I-
you're 70 technically.
I
but-
didn't get the same FaceTime with them as like Ron did with Frank. I also had a thing that I said, we're in a professional situation. I shouldn't go in and bother Milt Call and chat his ear off because he's got work to do and I should be doing something. And other guys were doing that. Andreas Deja built a great relationship with Milt Call, and Andreas, fantastic animator. And there were guys in Story who I got close to, but it's you know, and even Ward, I should have kept up with Ward and constantly, you know, said, what are you doing and all that. I've always felt like I shouldn't be bothering people, much to my detriment. You know, I wish I had done all that, or maybe all those people would hate me because God, he's always pestering us. But no, I didn't. So I didn't have that kind of, you know, relationship. And now social media changes everything. The fact that I'm on Twitter, will say something, or people will ask me to do something I don't want to do, and I'll get jerky with them, you know, or something, you know, that you'll see my warts. I try to keep those hidden, you know. Having podcasts to constantly where people ask questions about different things. You know, that's just didn't happen back then. And to say nothing of that generation was different in how they treated young people and what they were like and their lives and all that. So, you know, every once in a while I have to realize, I mean, in this conversation, I've made references to shows that I guarantee people listening to this will never have heard of, and maybe some of them will Google them or look them up on YouTube or something like that. But it's like, yeah, here's the thing. I had a friend who's a teacher, and she was using Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader to talk about the concepts of good and evil. This is back after the original trilogy, and but well before the prequels. She got to the point where she mentioned those guys, and there were kids who had never heard of them. That seems shocking right now. This last weekend, when the grandkids were up, my 8-year-old granddaughter, I had a carrot, and I was just biting it, and I said, "Hey, who says what's up, Doc?" And she looked at me blankly. And she's in a cartoon household. I mean, her dad, my son, they watch cartoons all the time and all that. But that thing, that cultural icon of Bugs Bunny, and the fact that his catchphrase, "What's up, Doc?" didn't resonate with her at all. It was like shocking. And even then, you always think the more of a fan you are of something, you assume the world thinks the same way. And Twitter makes that worse. I don't know about Instagram and some of the other things, but certainly the algorithm of Twitter feeds you the same group. So if you don't know Bugs Bunny, they're not going to be feeding you Bugs Bunny. So we all think our world's a certain way, but you're going to hear from your same bubble. But if you get into somebody's bubble, it's like, yeah, I've met people on my conventions. It's fantastic that I met fans. That was the first time I got to hear the reaction to my shows. That was 30 years after I had done the show, or 25 years at that time. My friend Ron Clemens, Glenn Keane, when they worked on features, they could go to a theater and hear the reaction of the crowd. I never got that. We had ratings, but we were already on to the next project at the time, or, you know, we didn't have that live feedback. So I got it 25 years later. Until the Rescue Rangers movie premiere, I sat in the El Capitan Theater, packed with people, including fans who had YouTube channels and certainly everybody who worked on that film. And they were laughing and roaring. And it wasn't my movie. It's not, I have one line in the movie. It's not like that got a big laugh. But it was, you know, it was great to see people playing around with our version of the characters and gags based on our show, and working. It was like cool to see that happen. Hopefully the Darkwing project will happen and I'll get that experience again.
It's going to be huge. Well, I really appreciate that you made the time to tell us everything about Disney, your life, these characters, and the moves you made and choices you made in order to adapt in this world and get this content out of people. I kind of want to just end by showing you something really quickly.
Sure.
So this is something you can see this picture, right?
Yes.
So I've been using CGI AI software. I'm kind of, if the Imagineers have become the empire, you could call me like a rebel. You know what I mean? So we're still using this technology. And I told this to using prompts. I said, AI, generate a painting using Jellyfish City. And it created the Jellyfish City and I used renderings and architecture, right? So I did the same thing using your art, or at least some of your art, and said, draw Darkwing Duck. And I think also, in a bed of flowers or some kind of something to do with flowers were related somehow. And he created this piece by looking on the internet, trying to find everything it knows about Darkwing Duck. And it, it's not perfect, but this is the beginning of things.
How bizarre is that? That's
right?
Awesome.
But you remember the Darkwing Duck episode where they go through the paintings and
yeah.
So
that was a brush with oblivion. I remember a few titles, but that one was again one of my favorites with Splatter Phoenix.
That and Negaduck just blows my mind. I have nightmares and dreams about Negaduck all the time. But this one was Darkwing Duck and Chippendale Rescue Rangers, and you can see Chippendale are in the eyes and everything, and the hat, and it's like a Renaissance painting. So as time, and again, this had just looking on the internet, trying to grab pictures of things you've done. Now, I'm going to train it to use literally your paintings, and I think it's going to be even more impressive because you'll be able to see, your actual art style and not other people's art styles, or you could throw it in. But
I mean, the paintings I've posted on my various sites.
Yeah. Your sketches and your illustrations and things like that. You can train something. If you have the right meta tags on something, it knows it's a Tadstone's piece, then it'll exclude other pieces and it'll make the style of art. Right now, this is, using several other artists as bases, but it's going to be more and more cool. And the ultimate thing is, I'm going to jump ahead. This is generative AI. It's tweening in between its own description. So it says draw a field, and then it draws the next frame, and it's procedurally generating all the content without any animators. This was all just with word prompts, right? So the future should allow you to make your comics into cartoons without too much of an army. And I just hope that encourages you to keep doing it, because I think that's what the world needs right now. You could have your
this is turning a lot of control being turned over to the AI to make it happen. So it's kind of like I'm fascinated watching it happen. Now, going back to your Jellyfish City, have you seen the trailer for Strange Worlds?
No, I have not.
It just came out yesterday, day before. Pixar's new movie. Imagine that Jellyfish City in a feature-length Pixar film. Pretty much, you'll see what I mean when you're going to be like, whoa, it is nothing like, you're saying, there's movies where you'll say, oh, that's pretty much like Finding Nemo. It's the same kind of thing. This is like, I don't know what that is, but I'm going to go see it. So definitely check it out, because there are so many weird things in this trailer that I would not be surprised that somebody did what you've done just to loosen up their brains, and then they'll find some little corner of it and say, yeah, now what if that one blew bubbles, and then they pull that thing out, and then they give the AI, I wouldn't be surprised at all. When you see it, you'll see what I mean. It's not saying like, oh wait, somebody else has done this. It's nothing like what you just showed me, but there's a Venn diagram happening there with that I could say, like if I was told to do a series based on that world, but they want new ideas, I'd use that technique. I'd say, okay, what do we feed in here to generate new ideas that we'll then take an artist to take that and make something brand new.
I can't wait to see it. But I hope to God that you continue to use your art and make more of your art so that we can animate it with computers and robots. But thank you so much for your time.
Hey, my pleasure. It's been great.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Targaryens.
Recent Targaryens. Recent Targaryens.